story time.
She kept looking around in panic, searching for him throughout her room, feeling his presence as something heavy perched on her chest and preventing air from reaching it. Then suddenly the most intense signs of terror appeared on her face before her feet fled and took her to hide in the place she thought was safest for her in that time. The moment, her bed. She covered herself tightly with the blanket, trying to stifle her coming breaths. She tried her best, hoping that he would not know where she was or that he would not come. Then, the investigation into the case of the little girl who was found dead in her bed, completely wrapped in her blanket up to her head, was closed due to lack of sufficient evidence. Perhaps the reason for death was due to suffocation due to the impact of the cover. Or perhaps there was another reason, which is why the case was closed and registered against an unknown person. My colleague in criminal research office said, "Do you remember the case of that little girl who was tied up against an unknown person for lack of evidence? The authority of the major?" I looked at him wondering, "Yes, is there something new?" He answered with concern, "I think you would like to take a look yourself." I didn't know it would be the worst night of my life. My colleague followed me to the same place where the investigation had been closed for over a year. The house was mostly abandoned, left by the parents after the death of their child, and they never returned. I walked cautiously, especially since the light had been gone from the house for a long time, and it was clear it would not come back. We walked with flashlights. My colleague was pointing his direction accurately. It was the little girl's room, the crime scene for over a year. My colleague looked at me and said, "Are you ready?" I nodded at him. Yes, he opened the door and my heart jumped with fear. The little girl was on her bed in the same position as a year ago. How did she get here? She was supposed to be buried after the investigation ended. And it has been over a year. How could she be in perfect condition as if she just passed away? Is this happening again after a year? How is this possible? My colleague noticed my complete astonishment and looked at me with a look that said, "There is still so much left." Then he pointed to the little girl's face. Her eyes were wide open as if they were about to come out of their sockets, and they were fixed on the ceiling of the room in terror. I looked back and forth between where she was looking, and then the major who was investigating the case of the little girl disappeared after returning to the crime scene again for unknown reasons, and a search is underway for him. The investigation into the case has been closed, and the matter remains mysterious until now. No one knows what happened to the little girl, nor what happened to the officer who went again to the scene of the accident more than a year later. Even the other officer who was with him left the house alone after 3 days as if he was out for a walk. There were no signs of scratches or violence on his body. He was not facing anyone and no one was facing him. But what was truly suspicious about him was that he did not remember anything. He was saying that he was a high school student, and all he wanted was to enter the police academy to become a police officer. An officer like his father, he doesn't remember anything about his professional life and the number of cases he investigated for 5 full years. He does not remember anything about them. He does not even remember going to that house, and this raises many questions. How was he able to leave and return to the police station when he did not know anything about being an officer in the first place? There was a lot of controversy over this issue and this house, and the matter became a mystery that baffles everyone who knew about the matter from near or far. And what raised the matter even more was the return of the girl's parents suddenly, and without any prior preparations to carry out repairs in the abandoned house in preparation for her to return to living in it again. What prompted them to take such a step after learning what happened to the officers in the house? Why did they come back in the first place after the decision to leave? What do these parents know? As police forces, we had to accompany them the moment they first entered the house. We had to know what had befallen that house and everyone who entered it a year ago. We sent a large police force that time to accompany the parents. They told us that there was no need for all of this, and that the matter would end soon, and that an escort of force like that for them when entering the house would be a bad omen and the worst idea ever. Well, another mystery added to this issue. What did they mean by these words? I decided to be cautious. If they knew anything, if they knew what was going on, then the best solution is to let them find the answer themselves, not us. I felt a lot of doubt towards the parents, so we let them move around the house, but without them knowing. We let them return to the house and we watched them from the outside. The first week was completely quiet, just a couple moving into their new house. But in the second week, after things had settled, I heard a loud scream coming from the basement of the house. The father appeared terrified from the window and was talking and gesturing frantically to the terrified mother in front of him. They were alone, and then another loud scream came from the basement. The monitoring team felt a sense of urgency and had to intervene. A voice message was sent to the police station saying, "We need to intervene immediately. We hope the reinforcements will arrive quickly, but we cannot retreat." That was the last message we received from the monitoring team. After that, they disappeared without a trace, and the parents disappeared as well. It was as if they vanished into thin air with no evidence of their whereabouts. The whole situation left us with more questions than answers, and made us realize that this was much bigger than we originally thought. It was clear that this couldn't be solved in the same way, and it was a mistake to let the parents return to the house. But perhaps the house had another opinion. On the second night after the disappearance of the monitoring team and the couple, another loud scream came from the basement of the house. The investigation is still ongoing and efforts are being made to find out who let out that scream, as they surely have many answers. After much consultation, we decided to monitor the house for 2 days before storming it. Perhaps an emergency or unusual matter might have arisen, but as I expected, nothing had appeared. It was as if this house or whoever was inside the house knew exactly what was happening outside and was monitoring our movements and perhaps one step ahead of us as well. Complete calm, as if this house had not witnessed the disappearance of 5 people, the killing of a child, then the return of her body and the loss of a police officer's mind. 2 days later, it was time to storm the house. The force was much greater this time. Everyone was convinced that we were facing something very evil. Everyone was imagining what we were facing, but whatever it was, I had a case here and I had to finish it, even if it cost me my life. We distributed ourselves, some outside the house to monitor who was entering or leaving, and others ahead of us to comb the entire place. My squad was heading to the basement, of course, but there was some place I had to visit first. The little girl's room. As soon as we entered the house, there was a strange feeling of tranquility that I had never experienced before. The house was really quiet and comfortable, and the repairs that the couple had made had removed all traces of desolation that existed in the corners of the house. Until now, it is an ordinary house. We moved a little, and then the forces that preceded us came and said that this floor is empty. There is no trace of anything or anyone. I went to the first floor, specifically to the little girl's room. There was some premonition, and I had to confirm it. But also, as I expected, the little girl was not in her bed. The room was deserted. How could the couple not repair that room? Why did they leave it like this, carrying all that desolation from the time of the accident? But I did not think much. I had a more important mission, the basement. I immediately headed with my squad to the basement and left a squad on this floor. First, we found a door. A closed iron door separates us from the basement, and behind it is another wooden door. We broke the lock and opened the door. Then with one hit, the wooden door opened easily. The door made such an annoying creak when it was opened that I thought it would disturb the sleep of someone downstairs. The tension was increasing as the door opened, and each of us had thousands of possibilities of what we would find facing us when we opened this door. But in reality, we only found stairs leading us down. It is clear that the basement did not. It starts yet, and all of this was preparation for our hearts that landed at our feet before the game even started. I entered with my team and left a group outside the door. In these situations, you have to make sure there's an exit so you can use it when needed. But before going down, I decided to take a look at the wooden door. What I saw was the worst start to our journey through the basement. There were claw marks on the door, as if someone was desperately trying to cling onto it at times, and trying to open it at other times, but to no avail. And there was a small toy lying carelessly next to the door. I approached it and found it was a small doll, possibly belonging to the little girl. But how did she get here? I couldn't find an answer to the question, and I didn't have enough time to ask. So I looked in front of me and we decided to start going down to the basement. The journey through the basement began, and each of us was prepared to face whatever we would encounter. Each one of us expected their worst nightmares to come true, thinking it could be our last night. We were all scared, but as an officer, you must face it with strength and courage. But at the end of the day, you're only human and you feel fear, of course. So you have to keep it inside and never show it. How can you be a senior officer and show your fear in front of a soldier from your squad? What will he do if you act in that way? That is why I tried as much as possible to keep my fear inside me, but my body could not. It showed all signs of fear in the profuse sweat that began to affect me as soon as I entered the basement. and the trembling of my hand that appeared on the pistol that kept dancing in my hands. The stairs were very long, or maybe that's what my fear convinced me, but at the end there was another door. Oh my God, this mission is going to kill me before it even starts. Another preparation for the surprise that awaits us. 1, 2, a slight push to the door. The door opened, then something heavy fell from the top of the door onto the soldier who was trying to open it. We were all terrified, and the soldier was pinned to the ground. I don't know what the horror of the shock was, or what. I directed my flashlight towards the thing lying on the soldier, who was still, and he did not move a step. It was the girl's father. He looked meek, as if asleep. Another soldier approached the soldier lying on the ground to help him get up and move the body away from his body. But when the soldier approached, his eyes widened in panic. He pointed to his colleague on the ground, and as soon as I got closer, I found a knife stuck in his stomach. The knife was carefully placed in the father's abdomen, who was supposed to be dead. The way the knife was placed was truly gruesome. It was sewn into his stomach, wrapped with a thread, and then sewn again with only the pointed tip visible. When the body fell on the soldier, it pierced his stomach and he was screaming in pain. I left 2 soldiers to take him out immediately and come back to retrieve the father's body, then continued on with the rest of the team. The room was completely empty, just some old furniture scattered here and there. We began to search the room, hoping to find something. Meanwhile, a strong scream erupted from a room next door that made our hearts go away. It was the room right next door. Without arrangement, without preparation, we rushed towards the door. One of the soldiers broke in. The door immediately, then he quickly retreated to allow us to illuminate the place so that the vision would be clear, and so that what happened to his colleague a moment ago would not happen to him. Then came the step to enter. Who would enter first? I had to enter first. I had to hold the reins in front of them. I entered and they followed me. And then as soon as we entered the room, as soon as the door of the room was opened, a strange silence filled the place. I am almost certain that if someone heard the scream, he would definitely and without a doubt say that it came from the heart of hell. Indeed, this thing or person is manipulating our minds in a crude way to make us collapse before the confrontation even begins. But the matter has already reached the point of madness, and it will be the end of one of us, or perhaps both of us. By the light of the searchlights, there were 7 of us in the room. We could not increase our number more than this. The room would not have been spacious, and the battle would have been lost before a group of huddled officers even began. In a small room, they could not stand due to their large number and the small size of the room, and they did not know what they were facing, so there was a group outside. Then suddenly the 7 of us turned on our flashlights the same time. If he wanted to play, let us start playing. The light of the flashlights made the room look like it was broad daylight and not the middle of the night. This brought a little reassurance to our hearts. The worst battles are those that target your helplessness. Darkness casts doubt on everything. It hurts the eyes and the mind greatly. Facing something you can't see while it can see you is one of the worst things imaginable. I don't know if any of them can read my thoughts or not, but what happened afterwards made my mind reel with madness. The flashlights all went out one by one in a precise order, from the first soldier's flashlight inside the room on the left to the soldier next to the door on the right, like a theatrical performance. And as the flashlight of the soldier next to the door disappeared, the door slammed shut with a loud noise that made our hearts skip a beat. The soldier carefully moved towards the door, trying to open it, but it was no use. Even the soldiers who were outside did not hear a sound, not even a weak attempt to break down the door or tap on it to make sure we were okay. And to continue the theatrical performance, my flashlight suddenly turned on with a strong beam, and I found myself face to face with something just a few centimeters away from me. I don't know if I'm still alive or not, but I think my heart stopped beating for a few minutes out of extreme panic. I saw a very hideous face when the light suddenly turned on. It was exactly in front of my face, only a few centimeters away from me, and it was an instinctive movement. I closed my eyes immediately, but I felt a weak tap on my shoulder and I opened my eyes to look back, avoiding looking forward. I found the soldier who was catching my attention motioning towards something in front of me, urging me to look, but there was no sign of fear on his face. I looked instinctively and saw the worst of my nightmares. It S. the little girl, looking at me with innocent eyes, not caring about what's happening around her or that she's supposed to be dead. Is this soldier losing his mind? Doesn't he know that the little girl is dead, that her body came back to life again? I looked at him while trying to My facial expressions are serious. It's not a joke now. And I whispered to him, "I am dead, aren't I?" It wasn't me who spoke. It was a voice that came from the depths of hell. A voice that I didn't recognize, but it certainly had nothing to do with a little girl. I looked at her with horror, but she still maintained that innocent look as if she hadn't spoken just a moment ago. But what if she really didn't speak? What? The sound of bones shattering. I immediately turn on the flashlight to find out what's going on. The scream of a soldier piercing the stillness of the night before the light of my flashlight goes out as well, and we plunge into pitch darkness, facing our worst fears. The darkness. 7 men, or maybe 6 because one of them is injured, and I don't know what happened to him or who he is facing. A little girl, or maybe something worse than that. I tried to call out to the soldiers, but to no avail. My voice came out weak and muffled. Then the nothingness, or that unknown voice, broke the silence, saying, "You officers have ruined everything. Why don't you always try to be in control? Why don't you let things go simply? Why don't you love to play?" Then I felt a hiss like a snake next to my ear. "Why don't you love to mess around?" I jumped up from my spot. This was not the voice of a little girl. This was more than one voice I couldn't determine. My heart was beating violently, declaring that it couldn't take all of this, the horror. My stomach churns and can't handle this amount of adrenaline, but my mind hasn't shut down yet. I just want to leave and I want to know. I think my tongue spoke involuntarily, in a weak, trembling voice. "Who are you?" Absolute silence for a few minutes. Then suddenly a flashlight lying on the ground lit up. It was the flashlight of that soldier who was definitely wounded. The light illuminated a small part in front of him. In this part, the girl appeared sitting on her knees with her back to us. In front of her, the soldier was lying on the ground, his eyes looking at us, but they were fixed, as if in another world. Or perhaps the sound of bones shattering again, and the little girl was so engrossed in her work in front of us that she did not even turn around when the light turned on. I approached her slowly, and then I almost fainted from what I saw. She was removing the bones from the body of the soldier who had died in an unknown way. However, it was pulling the bones away from his entrails until she could remove it from his body. She would break it to loosen its adhesion to each other. She would take it out, break it in half, then lick it to remove traces of blood and put it on her dress. I cannot explain it. I do not understand. I cannot understand anymore. How did you do this? How do you do this? I saw her doing this. I saw her take it out and break it. I left her to her work and rushed towards the door in the faint light of the flashlight. We have to get out of this cursed place. What is this girl? I tried to open the door multiple times, but to no avail. I cannot break it. You will feel me. This girl is not normal, and she's supposed to be dead in reality. I don't know who's dead now. Many failed attempts, and then suddenly the door opened without any damage to the handle, and I looked at the person who came in. It was the mother of the little girl. How did she get here? Then she surprised me with her question. "What are you doing here, officer?" What brought her here? I stammered and pointed inside the room to the little girl who had disappeared as soon as the light came back on. But wait, where are the soldiers? And the soldier lying on the ground? What is happening here? Have I lost my mind? I looked at her with a terrified look, my disheveled appearance and my lost mind, but I tried to explain. The little girl, the soldiers, the room, the light, the blood. She looked at me with a look that said there was nothing there. "You are in my house, in the basement specifically, and I don't know what you are doing here. If you weren't a police officer, I would have thought you were a thief. Now come with me and tell me everything. What is all this nonsense? Have I gone crazy? Does she need an explanation or do I? And what is happening here?" I followed her upstairs. It was completely quiet. No trace of the squad that was with me. No trace of all the soldiers who were here just a moment ago. No trace of the police cars outside. There was only a trace of a woman who was supposed to have disappeared days ago, and now she was sitting in front of me, treating me as if I were a madman who broke into her house for no reason. Have we gone back in time? Did nothing happen at all? Did I imagine it all? Did I even enter here in the first place? I think I have truly lost my mind. I woke up from my trance at the sound of her calm voice asking me, "Would you like a calming drink, officer?" I asked her, "Why do you think I need that?" She replied, "I think you haven't seen your disheveled appearance." I said to her without caring what she said. "It doesn't matter what my appearance is now, just tell me, where did you disappear and where is your husband?" I caught a glimpse of a cunning look in her eyes as she said, "I was here and my husband is traveling for work." "What? Traveling in a body like the one I saw? And how is she here?" "Here where? That woman is definitely playing with me." "Damn it," I said to her. "Here, where is my lady?" She replied, "Here in my house, officer." I did not like her words, so I said to her, "You know something. I think you are hiding something, or perhaps you are involved in this plan with your husband and daughter to manipulate the police, or maybe you're committing murders behind your plans. You and your husband suddenly disappeared without any warning days ago, and I saw your husband's lifeless body in the basement of your house with my team, and now you're telling me that you were here in the house and your husband was traveling for work. Do you think I'm crazy?" There was nothing on her face, not a single sign of surprise. Then she said calmly, "And I repeat my words that my husband is traveling, and that I have always been here. And as for you being mentally ill, I don't think I can be certain about something like this." I was about to speak when I felt a strong blow to the back of my head that knocked me out of balance. I fell to the ground and felt warm blood flowing on my body, and I see the child's mother looking at me smiling as she says, "You bring good fortune, officer. Look who just returned." I woke up to a terrible pain in my left arm, a pain that was unbearable, as if someone was pulling it off. I looked at it and I hadn't fully regained my focus yet. Then what I saw was hard for any human to explain. What I felt was really happening, but in a slightly different way. That little girl I saw in the basement was licking the bones of one of the soldiers. She was eating my left arm, devouring it as if it were a piece of roasted meat in front of her. She was relishing what she was doing, enjoying it immensely. She was biting the skin with her front teeth until she removed it. Then as soon as she reached the meat and the arteries, she cut them with her teeth and chewed and swallowed them. Then she wiped the blood off her mouth with the dirty sleeve of her dress and went back to what she was doing. I don't know how long she was doing this, but my hand was exactly open from the top of the palm as if she had only chewed half a bite. I don't know if I lost the sense of pain from the horror of what I saw or what, but I was looking at her in my open hand in shock, not knowing the depth of the wound and the rest of my hand that she was chewing on in her mouth. Suddenly, I snapped out of the shock to find myself screaming continuously until the father entered the room I was in and turned on the light. Here my tongue was tied and I couldn't speak or even scream. I saw the father, who I saw as a dead body, standing in front of me alive and even smiling at me with a mocking smile. If I had been in a stronger position than this, I would have actually killed him. But who knows? Would he actually die or not? But what made everything even more confusing was that I found myself in the little girl's room on the upper floor. That abandoned room that had become like a separate part of the house. The furniture was scattered in it with neglect, as if many accidents had happened there, or as if someone was struggling with something here. The father saw the panic on my face, then looked at the little girl who was still beside me, but she wasn't eating any other part of my body. Then he gestured for her to leave, and she left. Then the mother came and they both sat in front of me on the bed, leaving me in my miserable state and my never-ending pains. The mother tried to bring a rope to tie me up, but the father told her there was no need, as I wouldn't be able to resist or escape in any way. There was silence for a few minutes as my arm continued to bleed heavily and they watched me in silence. Then the father broke the silence, saying, "How's your arm, officer?" "Well, he's playing with my nerves now. He wants me to attack him so he can kill me. I won't do that. I won't attack him. I can't attack him." I looked at the ground as if I didn't hear his question at all, which made him say, "Well, I know your pain is severe and it hurts just as much as your questions. I think it's time we put you to rest." Then he looked down and raised his eyes only to meet mine and said, "Forever, officer." He looked at his wife and said, "Honey, can you bring the 2 girls?" "What? The 2 girls? It's 2 girls, not 1. Surprise appeared on my face, so he said, "Don't be so surprised, you will know everything. And now." The father said it while I still could not believe the matter with the 2 girls. My gaze was very focused on the door of the room, waiting for the 2 girls to appear together and for me to see them with my own eyes. The mother returned, and in front of her were 2 girls. One of them was the one who was devouring my arm a short while ago, and she was the one I saw in the basement. But the other was the one I did not see. Before, see who she is? Then where is the little girl who was found dead on her bed and buried twice? That girl was completely different from her in appearance, as if she had nothing to do with that family. She was also completely clean compared to the other child, and she looked very normal, unlike the other child as well. She was real, but as for the other child, I never thought she could be real. She was writhing in a strange way, and she was growling like a wounded animal that had just been injured and in pain, and her mouth was dripping with blood. It was clear that she was taking her meal when the mother brought it, which made her angry. I hope she doesn't really burn the place around us. A weak and muffled voice escaped his lips, filled with shock and pain. Who are these two? The mother took charge of answering this time, pointing to the girl who was devouring meat and said, "That's my daughter." Then she pointed to the other girl and said, "And I have no idea who she is at all." I looked at her with a surprised look, and the father continued about her saying, "As my wife just said, that is our daughter. But the other girl we do not know anything about except that she was kidnapped from her family, and we do not know anything about them. We do not even know her real name. She did not speak when she came to here, and still, in fact, she only does one thing." Then he looked at me with a meaningful look and a shrewd smile and said, "Screaming. The screaming." So she was the one screaming, the owner of both screams. But where was she when we opened the other room where the scream came from? Where does she disappear to so quickly? And how? Confusion still evident on my face, I didn't understand anything. I directed my question to the father. I said she was kidnapped from her family, so who kidnapped her? He calmly answered, "Of course it was us." I asked, "And why?" Anger appeared on his face as he replied, "She came here for a certain mission she was supposed to accomplish and then leave. She ruined the mission with her foolishness, so she paid the price and received her punishment. I don't know if I will let her leave after what happened to her or not." I asked, "And what did you do to her?" He responded, "Her entire role was to be our daughter, whom we adopted after the mysterious death of our own daughter. We brought her during our disappearance, that period when we distanced ourselves from everything in grief over our deceased little girl. She was meant to compensate us and start our lives anew with changes in the house that had become abandoned and desolate after the death of our child. That was, of course, the story that was supposed to be presented to the world and the police, so they wouldn't investigate the matter again. But when she came here, she was extremely weak and couldn't move. As I mentioned, she couldn't speak either, so we didn't consider her a threat. Just a little food to keep her alive and not lose her life while she was with us. But she made a mistake when the police patrol was outside. She made a mistake and screamed. That scream led the police to break into the house. We had to do something. We couldn't let them enter and discover her, so..." I interrupted him saying, "So you killed them?" He answered me in a crazy, amused voice. "Actually, we had a little fun. At first we cut them with knives, then we cut them into small pieces and served them as a hearty meal for our dear daughter. It was a delicious meal for 2 weeks, but you know there are things that cannot be eaten in humans, such as teeth, the pupils of the eyes, hair, nails, and these. They had other plans. I was about to vomit as I asked him, "And what are those plans?" He answered me with a crazy, idiotic laugh. "We burned them and left their scent filling every corner of the house. In short, we used them as a house freshener, home fragrance. Parts of the human body were used as a fragrance, and their daughter feeds on human flesh. What a completely unnatural and foolish family." That was our first mistake. Of course, we knew that a police force would be on its way, so we tried to finish our work quickly. The consequences at that time were not taken into account. There was a more important task at hand, preparing for what was coming. We placed her in her room in the basement and administered a highly effective sedative that would keep a child her age asleep for weeks. But we took precautions and restrained her. We had to distance ourselves from the situation. We had to appear as victims, not perpetrators. That's why we came up with the idea of the corpse. Presenting a dead body in front of you would naturally divert a significant portion of suspicion away from us. My stomach churned as I recalled how the body had fallen onto the wounded soldier, and I asked him, "But the body from its owner?" He simply replied, "Well, it's one of the soldiers who were on police patrol for observation." I looked at him in horror and exclaimed, "What? But the features? They were your features, the same features I see now. How is that possible? How?" He smiled calmly and said, "Calm down, officer. It is very simple. In order for us to have the same features, we cauterized his face." The father said it calmly and simply. This is how they ironed his face. My eyes widened in horror, and then I urged him to tell more, and it was as if he remembered details that were very dear to his heart. So he closed his eyes as evidence of ecstasy and then continued saying, in fact, the features of his face had to be completely hidden in order to. That mission would have lost its fun if I had only put my face mask on his face. It had to appear as normal as possible, at the very least, to a group of officers trembling as they walked in the basement of an abandoned house in the dark. It would have seemed normal, wouldn't it, Your Honor, officer? I looked down, overwhelmed with fear to the point where nothing else mattered, and we could only focus on the details. He looked at me with a suspicious look, then continued his speech saying, and so we ironed his face until his features completely disappeared. Do you know what his facial features looked like? Then he laughed and said, they were mixed together. I remember that his right eye was where his chin was after the ironing was finished. The important thing is that after the ironing was finished, removing the hair and eyeballs was an easy matter. We removed them and then put on my mask. I had made it in anticipation of the circumstances in reality, and as I expected. The time came when I needed to use it. My stomach was screaming in pain and disgust. I could not bear it any longer. I asked him to be silent, but he refused. He decided to increase my torment even more. The blood on my hands had stopped flowing and I no longer felt pain. I think I had actually lost the sensation centers in my hand. I could not move them or even move my fingers. Then he continued the story. The plan had to go as planned. My wife and I prepared everything for the body above the door in a horizontal way, and whoever enters through the door will enter in a vertical way. They will form a wonderful plus sign together. One of the soldiers will be injured. Their number will decrease. There will be a group outside. It will be easy to get rid of them. The danger lies in the senior officer who is with them, who is leading the whole matter, who decided to dig into the matter after the disappearance of the major, his colleague at work. After one of the other officers lost his memory when he left the house, the real danger lay in you. You dug up the truth and knew more than necessary. And because of your stupidity, you came with your feet here and now. What do you think I will do to you? I think I have entered a state of unconsciousness. I don't feel anything, and I couldn't see it clearly until I looked at it with an empty gaze and said, I wonder what it is. The response was, you will know soon, but first you will know the complete truth just as I told you. I asked, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you tell me all of this? He answered saying, because smart people like you sometimes make a lot of foolish mistakes because of their intelligence. Sometimes it can be harmful, believe me. That's why you need to know how foolish you were before you leave this life. Now, excuse me for a moment and I will be back to you. He left the room with a devilish look that I could not know what was behind it. I looked at the room around me. The mother and the two girls were still in the room. The mother was looking at me with the look of a guard who was waiting for the perpetrator to move so that he could pounce on him and kill him, and the girl who was not their daughter was looking at me with a blank look. It does not carry any meaning. I think she tends to be more miserable, and the cannibal girl was looking at my hand, which had blood clotting in it, with a look that I know well, as I have seen her in many vampire movies. She is thirsty for my blood then. I looked at her with a sarcastic look and said, excuse me, my dear. The blood is dried up. You have nothing left. I think she understood me because she returned to her frenzy and her eyes widened to an extreme degree and turned blood red. She was angry. She started moving her head swiftly from side to side until I thought her head would detach from her body. She was looking at me with a terrifying gaze that made my heart skip a beat when I saw her running towards me with all her strength. She will kill me. No, she will eat me. It is clear that they didn't want to get rid of me now, so the mother grabbed her and prevented her from devouring me alive, and with incomprehensible looks between them, the girl calmed down and moved away from me. The mother also left the room with the natural girl. After 10 minutes, the unnatural child was still with me in the room, in her usual position, facing her back to me and engrossed in something in front of her. I didn't know where the other child went. This would make my plan difficult. How will I find her? And she might be in the basement. I can't go down there again. I just want to leave here, but not in a comfortable way for these two disturbed parents. I wasn't tied up as I told you before, and my hands have lost a lot of blood and I can't feel them or move them. At this moment, I want to make use of my right hand in the most appropriate way possible to help me get out of here. I decided to seek the help of the human flesh-eater. She is the most likely person to help me. I will make the magic turn against the sorcerer. But first, I have to reach the other girl, get her out of here, and find out what happened to her from these two parents. I quietly approached the girl from behind, holding the rope that the mother wanted to tie me with in my hand. Then with a small stick, I hit the girl on her head and she lost consciousness. I would never have been able to control her if she was fully conscious. When she lost consciousness, it became easier. I tied her up and carried her on my shoulder, quietly leaving the room. The parents were not outside the room. The house was very quiet outside that cursed room. I wished with all my heart to find the other girl anywhere in the house except the basement, and to find her before that sleeping monster on my shoulder wakes up and before the parents appear, of course. I searched the rooms on the upper floor but couldn't find her. I quickly descended downstairs, searching for her everywhere. The basement door was open. Perhaps they were down there. I hoped the girl wasn't with them. I used my eyes, which had become accustomed to the darkness on this floor, and found her huddled next to a window, moaning in pain. Her voice truly pierced my heart. I approached her cautiously and turned her face towards me. She trembled at my touch. I tried to reassure her as much as possible that I didn't intend any harm and wouldn't hurt her like they did. She attempted to speak but kept moving her head aimlessly. Then, suddenly, she opened her mouth and what I saw horrified me. Her tongue was cut off. So this was her punishment. Maybe that cursed one on my shoulder had consumed it as her breakfast one day. I decided to throw the little one off my back so I could take the other one and leave this place. They didn't appear, and maybe I would never need her. I was about to release her when I heard a voice behind me saying, "Not so fast, officer." Great. I would feel terribly frustrated if I left here without executing my plan. How could I abandon that ferocious little one without utilizing her in the service of the little one? I felt them getting closer, and I prepared myself at that moment. I heard their breath behind me. I untied the ropes at the same time she began to wake up. This was the perfect moment. I threw her off my back onto them at the same time the father was about to grab me. I had freed her mouth and hands only. I took the other girl and rushed towards the door. My whole plan was to disable them, but what I saw when I approached the door was horror itself. She was devouring her parents. She attacked them ferociously, tearing them apart. I left behind that pool of blood and departed with the other girl, leaving behind a terrifying mystery that inhabited the corners of that house. Even after my departure, I still do not know many things. There are many mysterious matters that have nothing to do with reality, and that the human mind cannot even imagine. I decided to treat my deep wound, and the girl had begun to regain a little of her health. Of course, her psychological state was below zero due to the issue of her tongue and her inability to speak. But what eased the burden on her was that we found her family and brought her back to them again. For the first time, I see her laughing since we left this cursed house a week ago. No movements or sounds have come from the house since then. There did not seem to be any strange things. No one saw the mother, father, or even the little girl. It is possible that the soldiers killed them all, and perhaps they are in the basement now. That little girl who was found dead in her bed and was the reason at the beginning of the whole story. No one has ever heard of her as if she were particles of air. And it disappeared. The police decided not to return to the house again, and they also decided to burn it. When they went, they found traces of blood on the windows from inside the basement. It was certainly from predation. There were also pieces of meat scattered on the windows. No one knows what happened for the child or where she went, and throughout this week there was a continuous search for her. Perhaps she was still alive, but the search yielded no results, which made the police consider her dead. When the house was burned, I decided to enter. There were more mysteries that I could only search for answers to. I entered in broad daylight that time. I searched a lot in the entire house and did not find anything mysterious, so I decided that I must take that step, to go down to the basement. I was very careful that time. I knew my steps by heart. I memorized every detail and every corner in this difficult place, even during the day. I remember all those who were with me and are no longer there. I remember everything I saw here. There were only 2 rooms downstairs. One of them was the one from which the girl's scream came out. In it, I found a white piece of paper thrown carelessly in one of its corners. I approached cautiously and opened it. It was a letter written in elegant handwriting, very clean, as if it had just been thrown. With hesitation, I began to read what was written on it. It was not us who did this. The matter exceeded our imagination, exceeded our ability. We had to get rid of the girl. She was not normal. She was only normal when she was born. Then after we came to this house, everything happened. This house is a curse. The girl was 5 years old. She no longer craved food. She was angry all the time. She started to like going down to the basement. She started to like solitude and isolation in her room more. She became violent in her playing and in dealing with us. We used to let her go down to the basement to play because it was better than going out alone. It was clean, devoid of furniture, but it was clean. It was not terrifying. To the extent that the basement is explained, one day she came up from the basement with traces of blood on her mouth. We rushed downstairs with her. We found a dead dog, and she told us that she did not want to taste it at first, but he convinced her, and she did not tell us who. We prevented her from going down to the basement. The next time was in her room with human hands. She enjoyed it more than the dog, and from then on she stopped eating regular food and became thirsty for blood, sinking her teeth into human flesh, cutting and chewing it. That's what suited her. We could not act. We searched for everything, even magic was of no use. We decided to get rid of her. No one knew what she looked like. She would not come out. We had to act. It was a hideous act, but we had to. There was no other solution. We agreed with the cemetery keeper. We knew the time of the arrival of a corpse of the same age. We arrived at the cemetery, dug up the grave, and took out the corpse. We put it on the bed and hid its face so that nothing could be seen. We made the matter move towards suffocation, or perhaps someone would think otherwise and the matter would end in any way. It did not matter. The matter ended, and we treated it as if our daughter was dead and there was no way to escape from fate. And we killed her. We really killed her. We shot her in the head and then threw her into the forest. But after a year, everything changed. They came back together. The two girls came back again. That girl whom we dug up the grave to take out came back. She is in the same position on the bed, but her eyes are wide open. We do not know how she returned. We do not know who brought her back, brought her to bed, and opened her eyes like this, causing terror in our hearts. The officer's coming would have ruined everything. We should have gotten rid of him. We killed him, and his colleague lost his memory and left him tied up in the basement. We were not the ones who returned him to the police station. Indeed, it was not us. Maybe it's that curse too. And our daughter is back too. She was in the basement. On the same day that the grave girl returned, we heard someone's voice growling and moaning in pain in the basement. We went downstairs immediately, and she was there, looking at us with a ferocious look that made our hearts sink to our feet. Her eyes were filled with rivers of revenge. She was dirty as if she had just returned from the forest. Her hair was disheveled. Her eyes were blood red, and her mouth was filled with blood. Her clothes were dirty and torn from multiple places, and there were bruises on various parts of her body. Her appearance was truly horrifying. But what made our fear even greater was the fact that the bullet we used to kill her was still in the middle of her head. She placed her fingers on it and started to moan again. Then she stretched out only two of her fingers and pulled it out as if it were just a thread stuck in her hair. Then she looked at us with the same terrifying look and tried to attack us. But suddenly she stopped and looked around and moved her head left and right as if she was listening to something. Then she looked back at us, her expression less fierce, and approached us and hugged us. From that moment on, this became our reality. We lived with it and got used to it. We would have adapted if it weren't for your interference. You didn't leave us alone and got involved in our affairs, so we decided to do the same. We wouldn't allow anyone to uncover the truth. The girl's mood swings were changing, and we were sure that someone was communicating with her, moving her and informing her of what to do. What you did when you escaped from here was our mistake. It gave us one last chance perhaps to not make a mistake in getting rid of you, and we made a mistake because you managed to escape with the other girl. So our punishment is for our daughter to get rid of us. Our daughter will get rid of us. Now you know everything, and as we told you before, you have learned more than necessary and you cannot stay alive. You must be eliminated. He will do it. He really will. Goodbye, officer. What a journey it has been. The letter ended and my chest was rising and falling from the speed of my breathing after the horror of what I had read. There is a curse. It was not about the parents from the beginning. The matter was somewhere else. Something bigger than I had actually imagined. Much bigger and more dangerous. At that moment, the letter suddenly burned in my hands. I threw it quickly. Then I looked at the door. The room was closing quietly and my heart was being ripped out of its place with the sound of the door lock closing from the outside. The investigation into the case of the little girl who was found dead in her bed was closed permanently after the house burned completely for unknown reasons, and the body of the officer who was there alone minutes before the burning was not found.